Hi, welcome to Mental Health Mondays. It's good to be back after the Christmas break. I'm Heidi Gaiman from HeidiGaiman.com, and on Mental Health Mondays, we cover a mental health topic of some kind, and we try to do it in a pretty concise fashion, but also give you some new information, some new education, and some ideas for dealing with mental health for you, for those you love, for people in your community, and all of that good stuff. So if you have questions at any point, please throw them up in the comments and I will try to answer any questions. We are going to start a series for the next 4 Mental Health Mondays on mental health and families. Mental health and families. And so we're going to start with family dynamics. We are not islands. You know, we say that a lot in Heidi Given Rights. We're not islands. We live in relationship with so many people around us, whether those are relationships we super enjoy and they feel supportive to us, or whether they're relationships that are a struggle for us. But being honest about the fact that we live in relationship is really helpful. And so in our families, whether we live on our own, maybe you live on your own, maybe you live with a bunch of people, maybe those people are little tiny people that barely come up to your knees, and maybe they're taller people that come up to your shoulder, and maybe they're full-grown adults. But whatever family situation you live in, you are part of a family. They may not even live with you. Maybe the family that we're talking about is where you yourself grew up. And so being honest about the impact of all those family things in our life is really helpful for our mental health, both for awareness and then also helpful to be able to then begin to dive into later what we're going to talk about is some complicated things like addictions within family units or mental health diagnoses and how it impacts the family relationship. We'll especially talk about mental health in marriage. If you're married to someone with a mental health diagnosis, or you have a mental health diagnosis and you are married to someone, whether it's a diagnosis or not, maybe you have something going on and how that impacts us in our marriages. And then also we'll talk about grace-based parenting and dealing with some mental health struggles, whether very serious or very momentary in our parenting. So let's think about family dynamics. First of all, what's an FOO? An FOO is really important to define for our mental health. And an FOO is our family of origin, So that means the family that you grew up in. That can be what we consider a traditional family. Maybe you lived in a house with a mom and a dad. It can be a single parent home. It can be a non-traditional family where maybe you were taken care of by someone else, like your grandparents or an aunt or uncle. Maybe you were adopted. Your family of origin, though, is the people that surrounded you and gave care to you, were your caregivers as a child through the age of 18, whatever that looks like for you. That might also include, maybe you live with mom and dad, but then there was this other person that's frequently present and a big piece of that growing up years for caregiving. You're going to want to kind of include them in your picture of who your family of origin is. So what was your family of origin like? What was important to them? What were the written rules? What were the unwritten rules? So I want to ask you, and if you're listening, go ahead and throw up in the comments, what is something that was really healthy in your family of origin when you were growing up? And we're just going to celebrate that for a second. I think sometimes you can get really lost in the fact of all the unhealthy stuff in families. Families can be really difficult. And I think many of us probably grew up in a semi-healthy family to some degree. And sometimes we, while being honest about the difficult places, can celebrate some of the healthy stuff. So even if your family is a massive mess, and let's just be honest, that's most families, right? We have a lot of mess in our families. But what is something healthy from your family growing up? So for instance, my family really messy, but I always felt listened to growing up. Like I always felt like someone, if I had a problem, I could tell them. That doesn't mean that they always had the best response. That doesn't mean we always dealt with things really well, but that does mean that I knew that there was a certain value level in me sharing my struggle with someone else. And so that's an example of something healthy in a family unit, even when maybe not everything that comes from that is healthy too. But what is something healthy that you can identify in your family of origin when you were growing up? Sometimes we can see that a little bit easier than what's healthy in our family right now. Maybe you can spout off a bunch of things about right now, but you also, it's just easy to get, really too close to the situation, and then it's hard to be able to distinguish what's healthy from unhealthy to some degree. That's why we have therapists who help us see that. All right. Bonnie says they read the Bible and had devotions. So even when our families maybe did a whole bunch of things that may not be okay, there was a time and a place you knew for the Word of God in your family. And I think there's a safety in that. And some of you might be able to name 80 things your families did that was really healthy. And that's great too. But don't feel shame. Know that you're not alone. If it's a little bit hard to come up with some healthy things too, that's okay. We're just building some awareness in that. So you don't have to answer this in the question, but consider when you're thinking about your family of origin, did anyone in your family of origin have a mental health issue? A lot of mental health stuff is genetic. There's some genetic components of that. A lot of stuff goes undiagnosed. So sometimes when I'm working with a family, we might identify, well, this person had a diagnosed mental health issue, but we also might kind of consider what did we see going on that maybe looked like an undiagnosed mental health condition. And sometimes that gives some grace and lifts some shame in there, because that helps us to know that, this might have been a great challenge that might have been a little bit easier for everyone if we would have gotten the help we needed for it. This just seems to be really helpful for people to be able to give it kind of some names, and just be able to see like what God did despite those things, if you will. So did anyone have addictions? Was there any strained relationships? Some relationships that were cut off, any cut off relationships in our family of origins, those are really going to greatly impact the family unit, even if it's something we don't talk about, that can really influence the way the other relationships interact. How many siblings did you have? There is something to birth order, just like any other tool. It's not a be-all, end-all for us to understand ourselves and the dynamics within our family, but are you an oldest sibling? Are you a middle sibling? Are you a youngest sibling? Are you an only child? And how do you think those things impacted the way that your relationships interacted in your family? But then think of this question. How does your siblings' relationships impact your mental health, both positively and negatively? Any relationship is going to have an impact on our mental health, our emotional well-being. Where is there strain in the relationships with your siblings, and where is it, a positive place of support and well-being? And again, just being honest about that. We're not like judging it or labeling it with a diagnosis or anything like that right now. We're just kind of considering that impacts our mental health in some way. Other family dynamics that impact us are what we call enmeshed relationships. So these are like the relationships that are a little too close. Like it's really good to have, some people are going to have stronger relationships than other people within family units, but these are the people that have a hard time distinguishing their ideas from another person's ideas. Or they have a hard time distinguishing maybe their emotions from another person's emotions. And so if you grew up in a family where there's any of that, it's hard to go off to college, or it's hard to go begin to start a life of your own. And there's different varying degrees of that and different expressions of that. But enmeshed relationships can be just as difficult to deal with in a family unit as estranged relationships and cut off relationships and things like that. Did you grow up in a blended family? That's going to impact your mental health. Did your parents get divorced? Have you experienced the impact of divorce, even if from like an aunt or an uncle, close family friends, things like that? Those are all questions that are helpful for just rooting around this topic of how does our family of origin and how we grew up impact our mental health today? When we're honest about it and when we kind of evaluate it a little bit, then we can see what we want to do differently in our life today then, to positively impact our mental health. So maybe there's relationships that we need a little distance from, more boundaries. Maybe there's relationships that we need to heal and to reach into a little bit more strongly. Maybe there's some relationships that it's time to be honest about it, and that may not change a whole lot on the surface, but we might know then walking into the next situation, how to interact maybe a little bit more strategically. And then what we want to pass on to in our own families. If you have children at home still, even if you have adult children, if you're single and haven't even crossed that realm yet, just considering the legacy for you that you want. What did your family look like, but what kind of legacy as an adult do you want to pass on to whoever you influence, whether that's in your house or elsewhere? Traditional and non-traditional families, God has a place for. He cares very much for any family of any shape and size, and that's also worthy of celebration. Your dynamics may be complicated. Everyone's are complicated. And that's kind of a focus that we're going to have on mental health in 2020 is mental health, it's complicated. And there'll be a podcast coming out in a couple weeks and a new blog post and blog series also on the complications, the many sides of mental health, if you will. And the same is true, especially within our families. So I hope that gives you just some questions to think about in regards to your family origin as we dive into family dynamics here. And in the coming few weeks, we'll identify a little bit more specifically those other areas of mental health within our families. Go ahead and throw any questions you might have at me about families and mental health, and I'll try to work them into the next Mental Health Mondays. If you have any questions, you can always find me at HeidiGaiman.com. On the About page, there's a contact form there. I'll see you next time.